my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is in partnership with Needed. The prenatal vitamin industry is failing us, leaving 95% of us depleted during one of the most nutritionally demanding times in our life. There's overwhelming evidence that higher standards of nutrition will improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life. Despite this, most prenatal vitamins only provide bare minimum nutrition. Needed goes way beyond bare minimums with products that can fully meet the needs of our minds, bodies, and babies. Needed's radically better nutritional system is third-party tested and rigorously developed with the endorsement of over 6,000 women's health experts. In addition to their prenatal multivitamins and pre- and probiotics, I am obsessed with their cognitive support supplement, which helps with brain fog, which I know is such a struggle when you're postpartum. At this point, I've talked to so many Birth Hour listeners who have discovered Needed through the podcast, and I love hearing the feedback that they're feeling better during pregnancy since starting with Needed's prenatal vitamins. Needed has all your needs covered from preconception to postpartum and beyond. Needed also simplifies things by bundling core products into easy and flexible monthly plans. You can use the code BIRTHHOUR for 20% off your first order and up to 40% off monthly plans at thisisneeded.com. Since this discount applies to your first order only, I always recommend going with one of the plans for the best value. At the end of this episode, I talked to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and what makes their products really stand out. So stay tuned for that conversation at the end of this episode. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another great way to be part of the Birth Hour community is by supporting us over on Patreon. So by pledging your support each month at the $5 a month level, you can get access to all of our archived episodes, so over 800 additional episodes not in the main podcast feed, as well as our private Facebook group that has such a great backlog of information. Just using that search bar, you can get almost any question answered, and you're going to find really supportive people there that are going to become your friends. And in addition to that, we do monthly Zoom calls. Just go over to patreon.com/Birth Hour and become a Patreon member and come see what it's all about. It's just $5 a month. You can get an even bigger discount. If you want to do an annual membership, you'll see that option there. And there's also an option to get it as a gift. So if you have a friend or a mother-in-law or somebody asking you what they can get you to help you prepare for baby, maybe you want a Birth Hour Patreon membership so that you can listen to more and more birth stories and find great community. So again, head over to patreon.com/Birth Hour to get started with that. Today's birth story guest is Jenny, and she has quite the journey to share with you guys. She had a hospital birth that she said was really magical, had what she described as a perfect epidural, but then she had undiagnosed placenta accreta, which led to Asherman syndrome and a really long journey for her postpartum, struggles with breastfeeding, and then even secondary infertility. I just talked to her yesterday, though, and she is at home with her 8-week-old baby, number 2, so it's a happy ending on that infertility journey as well, but I'm excited for her to share her first birth with you guys today. All right, let's hear from Jenny. Hi, Jenny. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Bryn. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share my story.
Awesome. I know we have a lot of different aspects of your story to get to, but before we do that, will you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Yeah, definitely. My name is Jenny. I live with my husband, Chris, and almost 4-year-old daughter, Maya, in the Philadelphia suburbs. And I'm a dentist originally from Mercer Island, Washington, which is a suburb of Seattle. And my husband is an ENT from Gaithersburg, Maryland. And we met when I was in dental school and he was in med school in New York City back in 2011.
All right. I feel like I would have wanted to ask you like all the dentist questions with my kids if we met at a party. I'm sure you get that all the time.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I do.
All right. Well, yeah, take us back to finding out you were pregnant, pregnancy, anything you want to share there.
Great. Yeah. So I was pregnant in 2020. We were living in central Pennsylvania near Hershey at the time, since that's where my husband was matched for his ear, nose, and throat residency. And now we had not been deliberately trying to get pregnant, but I had gone off the pill that month since we knew we were going to start the process. And I was about to leave that weekend to go on a girls' trip to Montauk and decided to take a test on a whim, especially because another friend of mine had just told me the day before that she was pregnant. So it was definitely on my mind. And lo and behold, the test and probably 7 others that I took were positive, and I turned into the trip's designated driver, which I wasn't expecting.
Your other friend wasn't there too, the one that was pregnant?
No, she was not coming on the trip. It was another couple of my girlfriends who were not even trying at the time. So yeah, it was just me. And it was also a birthday trip for me too. So I just kind of, yeah. Anyway, so I completely took for granted how easy it was for me to get pregnant that first time. And it was even pretty upset at the news, I would say, since I felt like I couldn't have the same weekend I was planning on with my girlfriends.
Yeah.
But later on, I found out that another one of my girlfriends, not related to that trip, was pregnant, and we were all within weeks of each other, which made it really special. Just sharing and going through everything together was really fun, especially since, I don't know, I was feeling pretty disconnected from everyone living in central Pennsylvania, away from my friends during COVID. Just really easy to feel isolated during all of that experience. But in preparation for my pregnancy and my birth, I did a fair amount of research. I felt very prepared and empowered for my upcoming birth. I listened to, I think, every available birth hour podcast at the time. And I remember my husband saying he thought that I was getting a little too obsessed with the whole birthing experience. But I feel like I'm in pretty good company with that on this podcast saying that. So I also read several books, most notably and commonly mentioned Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, which made me super fascinated by my body's natural ability and really sparked my curiosity for an unmedicated birth. It also gave me some ideas about positions that I wanted to try to give birth in. And I'm pretty sure this is in that book, but I remember seeing a picture of a woman in the woods hanging from a branch of a tree while her feet were on the ground. But that feeling of gravity doing some of the work really resonated with me for some reason. And I wasn't sure how that was going to translate in a hospital setting at the time, which I knew was what I wanted.
Right. No tree hanging.
But I knew that we could try to work around something that I could like hang slightly from something. It also made me think a lot about my family and their experiences giving birth too. I loved listening to other birth stories that I had never had these conversations with any of my family members before trying being pregnant, being part of that process. My mom had 2 relatively uncomplicated births of my sister and I. She had a C-section with my sister and then a VBAC with me. And my father's mother, who gave birth to more than 4 children in her home in a remote village in Nepal with no medical intervention or supervision, also really inspired me to have faith in my body and just the power of the mind to get through any pain. My sister had 3 kids, vaginal C-section, then VBAC. And my husband's sister also had 3 uncomplicated vaginal births. So anyway, I felt like I had a lot of reason to think that everything was going to be okay and that my body could definitely do this if all these women in my life could do it and thrive afterwards as well. So part of our process was also that I looked and found a local doula who was certified in hypnobirthing, which was something that I was interested in. And we definitely used the hypnobirthing during our labor later on, but we didn't actually end up using our local doula during the birth, which might make a little more sense as I go into my story. And before I get into that, overall, I just had a very routine pregnancy. I worked out around 4 days per week, and it was COVID, like I said, 2020 into 2021. So I was very into my Peloton workouts, but not really going into the gym or anything. My only complication that really bothered me was that I had terrible numbness and some pain in both of my hands, carpal tunnel syndrome. And as a dentist, this really impacted my ability to do my job towards the end. Betamethasone injections at my local orthopedic urgent care helped so much. And I really kicked myself for not doing them sooner because they literally worked within 24 hours of doing it. And it was like a night and day experience. I was super fortunate and was surrounded by a lot of love and people that cared about me, and had 3 baby showers. One at work that I shared with my coworker and friend who was another dentist at my practice who was pregnant, and she gave birth just a week ahead of me. And then another shower with family, another with friends. And it was around that time that I was having those showers that I started to not be able to see my ankles anymore. I was super swollen. And at 36 weeks, I started to get headaches, which is very atypical for me. They were not going away with Tylenol. And toward the end of that week, I started to even see some rainbowy floaters, which prompted me to take my blood pressure. And probably see where this is going. The first reading was 153/100, which prompted me to immediately call my OB. I knew immediately that was a high reading. She told me over the phone to lay down for 30 minutes and take it again. And even with lying down for 30 minutes, it's easy to get worked up. And my blood pressure was still higher than the next reading, just slightly. So it was 156/103. And needless to say, we were told to go to the ER that night. And I had a mental block at that point that I was just going in to get checked. It wasn't going to bring a hospital bag. My husband really had to force me to do it. And this ended up being a really good idea since we didn't leave the hospital for 5 days after that. And I'll just say after that, after we got the car packed and ready to go, I was in shock.
Yeah.
Driving to the hospital, didn't say a word to my husband. True shock until we were getting off the exit going to the hospital off the freeway. And I just started uncontrollably crying. I was feeling so overwhelmed and out of control. Since I really didn't want an induction, it was actually with hypnobirthing with our doula. She had us write out some of our fears and we ranked them. And an induction was my number one fear out of the whole birthing process. And here it was feeling like it was going to come into fruition. And I wasn't going to get that unmedicated, no intervention birth of my dreams. So yeah, that's kind of how the process of getting out of my body started.
Yeah.
And so around 10 o'clock at night, April 4th, I was admitted at 36 weeks plus 6 days. And I'll never forget that first time getting checked in the ER. It was the worst pain I've ever felt, even to this day. It was an absolutely horrible way to start my birthing experience. I didn't even know at the time if I could have denied that check, but it was horrible. My body wasn't ready in any way to have the baby. I'd never been checked before that either by my OB ever in the office. The ER doctor couldn't even reach my cervix. It was so high and posterior. So yeah, they got me admitted pretty quickly just because of my blood pressure alone. And my induction ended up involving a lot of the usual players that you hear mentioned on this podcast, Cervidil and Cytotec and a Foley bulb. And my induction was slow. It went on for a full 48 hours. I was also on magnesium sulfate because of the preeclampsia to reduce risk of seizure, which is also a standard. And after being on it for over 24 hours, I was feeling some of the expected side effects of it, which are nausea, malaise, and just feeling absolutely exhausted. I had the shakes at one point, which were really intense, and I wasn't really sure. It's so funny when you feel like you're really researched and prepared, you get really into the research of the birth that you want and not necessarily the birth that you don't want. So I had no idea what to expect with an induction because that wasn't the birth I was planning for or wanted. So I wasn't sure about what to expect with progression. And all I knew was that it just felt like it was crawling on. I would get checked every 6 to 8 hours for progress. And I would maybe go up a centimeter over that amount of time. And it would just feel so defeating. But after looking at medical records, looking back on it, you can read through it and say, wow, this was actually very steady and actually very normal. And I wish somebody would have just told me that at the time. Like, Jenny, this is going to take some time. This baby she's not ready to come out yet. So it's going to take some coaxing. And so I think if somebody would have just kind of let me know that and let me know that I was in for this marathon versus letting me feel so discouraged at every check, I think that would have kind of helped my mental state a little bit. I initially asked them to hold off on the pit, but eventually started it in the early morning on my second morning after admission, which ended up being the day that Maya was born. And this was also the day that I had said I had enough and got an epidural at 8:30 in the morning. The anesthesiologist did readjust the epidural once because I was able to tell her immediately. I only felt it on one side. And honestly, the epidural was perfect. I could still feel some sensation even in my legs, but the pain went down immensely. And I believe I had similar feelings to what they call a walking epidural, where I could technically support myself on my legs, but it felt like I was moving through thick, wet cement that was, all the way up to my belly. And by 6:30, my pain was back at a 9 out of 10. I was 90% effaced at that point, 0 station, 8 centimeters dilated, and I was pooped. I was so tired. I hadn't slept. It had been pretty much almost the full 2 days at that point. They turned off the magnesium at my request, and I was finally able to get some sleep after my husband led me through a hypnobirthing meditation. And a little after 10 o'clock, I started feeling some pressure. So they checked me again. And at that point, I was 100% effaced, +2 station, and they said I was ready to push. So although I was definitely convinced I just had to poop, it was one of those times where all the information goes out of your head, that stuff that you already know, that's the feeling that you get when it's time. But I literally was yelling at the nurse that I was going to rip out my catheter because I needed to get to the bathroom. And she was just like, no, you need to stay exactly where you are and just try to take a breath. But yeah, there was no reasoning with me. I was definitely on another planet at that point.
Yeah. Okay, so remind us again how long from starting the induction to starting pushing?
It was almost a full 48 hours.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then I'm hoping pushing went fast for you.
It did.
Yay.
Thankfully. Yeah. So they did end up breaking my water. And 30 minutes later, I was on my knees hanging from a towel that was wrapped around a squat bar on my bed. And I remember the midwife saying, okay, Jenny, I can't see anything with you in this position, so you're going to have to reach down and catch your baby. And the room was dark. It was only lit with these small twinkling artificial candles that I had bought. And Maya was born after 30 minutes of pushing. And that part of my experience was exactly what I wanted. Even if it was medicated, even with all of the interventions that I had, even if it was less than an hour of the entire 2-day extravaganza, it was so healing that I had at least that pushing part of it that it just felt exactly what I wanted.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
More like what you had kind of prepared for and envisioned.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So let's talk about meeting your baby and immediate postpartum.
Yeah. So as far as meeting Maya, I think I was very much one of the women that are in shock afterwards. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like this huge elated moment where, we had this immediate connection. They put her on my chest, and I have a picture that I treasure from that moment. She wasn't really crying, and I was wondering, is she okay? She's not really crying. You just go through all of the worried thoughts, but I had soon to be other worries that were coming into fruition that were happening running at the same time, since at that point they were also trying to figure out what was going on with my placenta, since my placenta wasn't coming out. And that was the start of a long journey that I hadn't prepared for in the least, and had never known anyone that had any placental issues after their birth. So what happened, a larger piece of it came out, but it continued to come out in pieces. There was no effort to do any ultrasound or get me into a D&C, which I later found out to be not the standard of care. And the midwife actually tried to cut the placenta out of me, and she did try to manually remove it, which actually wasn't a terrible experience for me. Luckily, I did have the epidural. But she said she was confident at that point that she got it all. The OB wasn't even called in, and no other precautions were taken to ensure that it was out. And 48 hours later, while we were still in the hospital, I was being followed up for my blood pressure, and Maya had dropped in weight significantly since my colostrum wasn't coming in, and she had high bilirubin. So yeah, we were still there. That was when I passed a huge piece of placenta. It was the size of my hand when I was going to the bathroom. And at this point, still no tests were ordered to see if there was any more inside me. I think they probably just figured that was maybe the last of it. And I was discharged the next day, 3 days after delivering Maya. And I will say that my mom was a godsend and ended up taking leave from her work so she could support us during this time. And she ended up staying with us for 5 months. And she lives in Seattle and we live in Pennsylvania. So it was a big deal for her that she was staying with us for that long. So after being home, I had severe pain, which felt worse than labor. I called my OB and they said to take Motrin and to call back if that didn't help. I think they probably just figured I was having some of those, post-birth contractions and whatnot with my uterus shrinking down. A couple days later, though, my blood pressure was back up and I had to go to the ER back at the hospital and had a full workup, was in the hospital for 2 more days after finally getting a D&E. And this all happened, 4 days after being discharged initially from the hospital. So I was discharged again. And then 5 days later, my BP was up again. I called my OB and they brought me in to do an ultrasound and said I needed another D&E since there was more products of conception left. So I went to the hospital that afternoon for the procedure, this time as an outpatient, and I was discharged pretty much immediately. I got home and I felt so weak. I nearly collapsed. I remember my husband catching me on the stairs and him and my mom said I looked green. And at that time, we didn't know I'd lost a substantial amount of blood during the procedure. I didn't even realize it until I looked at the post-op notes in my medical chart online the next day, which is where I saw I lost 800 milliliters of blood, which is a pretty significant amount. I felt terribly weak over the next couple days, only leaving bed to go to the bathroom. And then on April 21st, when I was 2 weeks postpartum, I started having severe chills in my bed. I felt like I could not get warm, just shaking. And I was scheduled for a follow-up with the same OB who did those 2 D&Es on me. And he wanted me to come into the ER. And at that point, I was done. I lost all trust in him and decided to go to my husband's hospital, which was Penn State Hershey Medical Center. But I was so weak, I actually needed an ambulance to get there. And I'll just say that I didn't initially choose Penn State as my hospital to give birth because I didn't want to have a bunch of residents involved in my care. But they ended up saving my life. And I really, if I had any regrets, I wish I would have just started there.
Yeah.
So anyone who feels like they might be against it because of the residents, there are so many checks and balances and benefits to those hospitals because it is a teaching hospital.
Right.
So it's something to keep in mind rather than write something off from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got there, I was admitted immediately. I had sepsis and fever of 105. My doctors were all saying that I was lucky to be alive. I had never received antibiotics from the other doctors outside of that hospital. And I was in the hospital there for 7 days and received 2 blood transfusions. And it took them a while to figure out which IV antibiotics would work. And they also had to confirm that I didn't have any permanent cardiac damage. So there was just a lot of tests and a lot of waiting around and for cultures and figuring out what was going to work to get me back on track.
So scary.
Yeah, I feel like it was definitely just a permanent elongated state of shock.
Yeah.
I didn't even want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to talk to my friends. I didn't even know what to say. It's like, how are you doing? I don't know.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a touchy time. And my mom would bring Maya into the hospital every day so we could be together and I could attempt to feed her. But there were definitely issues that I'll get into that later as well.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. I was discharged exactly a week later from Penn State, and we didn't really know what was going on with my uterus since the risk was too high to do any more instrumenting. So I was seen for follow-ups while still on oral antibiotics and blood pressure medication. So as far as how Maya was doing throughout all of this, it was a hard time for a newborn too. She was going through a lot. And it really felt like I was saying in a constant state of stress throughout that time.
Yeah.
And with so much uncertainty if I was okay. And then with Maya was having feeding troubles and was losing weight. And my mental health was just going down the tubes. We actually had to take Maya to the ED the day after I was discharged from my 7-day hospital stay due to severe diarrhea from antibiotics that I was on. Even though I had been told it would be okay, her body said otherwise, obviously. And from then on, I didn't breastfeed her at all. So I was pumping and dumping, and she was on formula full time. And my lactation consultant also said that my milk was just not coming in properly because of the placenta not being delivered completely. And it just tricks your body into thinking that you're still pregnant when there's still remnants of placenta in there. For a long time. I mean, that went on for months because of the Accreta that I ended up having. It took a lot of time for them to get all of that placenta out. And as someone who was so excited to breastfeed, and it was honestly something I took for granted. Every single person that I knew never had any breastfeeding troubles, even though I know now that they are so common.
Yeah.
But I came from a family of, overproducers. My sister was giving away her milk, and I was like, oh, okay, well, if she can do it, then I'm sure my body will be the same. But that's just not how nature works.
Yeah, well, and your body was going through something that most people don't go through. So
right, it definitely was. So I was super devastated to have that hang up in that department. With Maya having these ongoing GI issues for months, I was having yeast infections in my breasts from the antibiotics. And eventually, after 3 months, I painstakingly made the decision to stop and switch to formula full time, which was so much more emotional than I could have ever anticipated.
Yeah.
I was really in the trenches, and I was trying to immerse myself and read books about breastfeeding and hold her, do skin to skin, do all the things, but just nothing was working. And I was drastically underproducing, and feeding being so painful and pumping also being so painful. Both would just give me so much anxiety.
Yeah, I bet.
I remember sitting next to my pump, and my husband remembers this too. I would just sit next to my pump and I would look at it, and I would have to psych myself up to do it. And I don't feel like I hear a lot of women talk about that. It was just such a mental battle for me to keep going on that journey, but also so hard for me to get off the train. It was not a fun point to be at.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I feel like most people are probably I can't believe you made it that long. That's just too much for anyone.
Again, I saw my sister breastfeed for years. And so I just had that expectation that I was going to do it. And I was so married to the idea. It was really hard for me to let go. But after I did, oh my goodness, I think everyone's mental health increased in the house.
Yeah, I bet.
Because, more people can be involved and just take some of that weight. And it was a really good decision. I don't beat myself up for letting it go on that long.
Yeah.
But it was time.
Yeah, you had to be ready and make that call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because prior to having a baby, I would have been the first person to say to a friend, you're an amazing mom. You need to take care of you too. It seems like it's hurting you. Maya needs you more than for your milk. I'm usually such a logical person. I never thought I would be so attached to anything in my motherhood journey in this way, but it was just one of those experiences that changed me after becoming a mom. And I have so much more empathy for things that I thought were quote unquote smaller decisions during that super fragile time of being a new mom.
Yeah. Can't really appreciate the weight of all that until you go through it, I think.
Definitely not. So after a couple of months went by, my REI doctor, Dr. Estes at Penn State, who wanted to perform my first hysteroscopy. And I'll just say a hysteroscopy, for those who don't know, is where you're typically put to sleep and the reproductive endocrinologist will take a scope. They dilate your cervix and they go into your uterus and they can see exactly what's going on in there with a camera while they are, inflating your uterus with saline so they can actually see, because your uterus is more or less kind of like a deflated balloon. Otherwise, they can't really get around in there very easily. So they have to inflate it with saline and then look around with a camera. So Dr. Estes wanted to perform my first hysteroscopy to see what damage was done to my uterus and how to make a plan to solve it. And I learned after that first hysteroscopy that I had stage 4 severe Asherman syndrome, which in my case meant 100% of my uterus was obliterated with scar tissue, completely filled. It was just a block of scar tissue. She noted a location on my posterior wall, and that was actually with an ultrasound, where it appeared to have been very damaged and likely perforated. And I'll say likely perforated because she said she couldn't fully say that without exploratory laparoscopic surgery, which I was not interested in because of just everything else I had gone through. I didn't need that confirmation. But it was also extremely likely that it was a perforation because of the types of bacteria that were found in my uterus were consistent with ones found in the bowel. So I went on to have 4 hysteroscopies with Dr. Estes, and I truly credit her to saving my uterus and my life. Many REI doctors don't have the experience with Asherman's patients, but I was lucky Dr. Estes did. And the way that she presented her treatment plan was really open-ended. She basically told me at that initial visit that she wasn't sure how many procedures I would need to be medically cleared. And it might take more procedures even after that to remove enough scar tissue to prepare my uterus for a possible future baby. So her thoughts were initially that I would get 3 of these hysteroscopies, but she wouldn't know until I'd healed, since every time you cut away scar tissue, some always comes back. So at the time,
oh my gosh,
that was so devastating.
Yeah.
I felt defeated. I thought that we could put this whole thing behind us.
Right.
And I was just clearly in for a marathon of not knowing when this whole thing was going to end. And so, of course, with more surgeries come more possible unanticipated risks and events. And with me being a dentist who's married to a doctor, I have a lot of doctors in my life who are there for us, for me and my husband to call on for specialized opinions and whatnot. So one that I felt really impacted my experience after these procedures was one of my closest friends' husbands, who's an anesthesiologist, who told me, since these procedures are relatively short, 1 to 3 hours, it should be good without any of the gases. Because that first hysteroscopy I had, they just gave me the whole cocktail. And for many people, you just feel sick and nauseous when you wake up after having these anesthetic gases. So he told me that remifentanil and propofol could very likely be it. They ended up being my basic anesthesia measures. I gave every single CRNA or anesthesiologist clearing me for surgery, and it allowed me to wake up feeling basically fine, almost like nothing had happened.
Wow.
Short of any minor cramping from the procedure itself, but just to not have that nausea and elongated period where I felt like I was having to recover just from that alone was a deal breaker for me, especially after having needed so many of these procedures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome that you found that.
Yeah. So anybody, it's just worth asking your CRNA or anesthesiologist if that's something that could apply for you in that situation.
Right.
So June was my first surgery, and I continued to have 3 more through my 4th surgery, April 2022. So that was a full year after having my daughter. And it was after my third surgery, actually, I had a complication where I had some bleeding, where it felt like a significant amount was coming out, but it was only when I was urinating. So as I was bearing down. So I was never feeling a pad, which is, one of the markers that doctors tell you, like, call me immediately if you're feeling a pad within a shorter amount of time. And that was never happening. But I was like, this doesn't seem normal. So I called my doctor. I went in to see what it was all about, and it ended up being an AVM, which is an arteriovenous malformation. It's something that can happen when the healing of the vessels is disorganized and in the wrong place. So they were emptying into my uterus, and as I pushed, as I would bear down, I would bleed. And it actually happened. I bled when they pulled the speculum out of me when I was at that REI appointment getting checked. And it prompted a huge series of events. Immediately, they did more ultrasounding, and every single doctor in the department, which is probably 7 doctors, came into the room to see what was on the ultrasound screen. Apparently, they are somewhat rare in this location in the uterus. So I was scheduled that day for an emergency embolization with interventional radiology. And the procedure was actually pretty cool. I was kept awake for the procedure where they embolized my right uterine artery. They went in right where my thigh meets my pelvis. And I had a really awesome IR doctor who was so cool, calm and collected. While it felt like all the REI doctors were in a very, not frenzied state, but just excited to see something really interesting. No one wants to feel super interesting. So my IR doctor was just more of a cool cat, which put me at ease. And he reassured me that the loss of that artery shouldn't affect my blood supply to my uterus as more vessels form to make up for that deficit. After my final hysteroscopy, my REI doctor encouraged us to try to have more kids if we wanted as soon as possible. Due to my age, I was 33 at the time, and to also try just before more scar tissue possibly came around due to healing from the surgery. And at that point, we were still in a place where we had not worked through the trauma of that year, and definitely were not in a place to even talk about having another child. I found myself experiencing postpartum depression, really throughout that time. And my husband was experiencing postpartum anxiety. And to be honest, it was really difficult for us to come together when we both felt like we had these weights on our shoulders. We were still experiencing all the woes of going from 0 to 1 child that most people experience. The sleep deprivation, the tumultuous feeding journey with me trying breastfeeding to going to trying SNS feeding with the tubes, to finding the right formula that didn't irritate her stomach and worrying if it's the formula or was it her poor gut that was so injured from my antibiotics. Just so much going on. I did end up seeking therapy, as did my husband, but it honestly wasn't for probably another year after that. So there was just a lot going on. It didn't feel like we had the capacity to even talk about it at that point.
Yeah. So you started therapy a year after that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So honestly, what ended up helping me the most was slowly just practicing telling my story, telling it to my friends, telling it to my family, telling it to people that I would just come across as I went back to work. I would tell coworkers, I would tell patients that I had a connection with. And it started to give me more and more peace over time. That was how I dealt with it prior to seeking therapy. And it was, I think, actually super effective for me. But
that's good. Just not keeping it all bottled up.
Yeah, I definitely sought professional help, and that helped as well.
Yeah.
Another important thing that I wanted to mention is that when I was in this period of getting all these procedures, my mom encouraged me to look to Facebook for a support group for Ashermans, which had not crossed my mind in the least.
Yeah.
But this was more helpful than I could have ever imagined.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I learned so much from these women. And when I had searched on Instagram, which was something that I was using more at the time, there was nothing. I think there was like one page that someone had mentioned Ashermans, and it wasn't being managed at all. So I learned so much from these women. I was especially interested in all these success stories of women who went from 100% scar tissue like myself in their uterus to being completely cleared and able to have children again. And it gave me so much hope. I also tried many of the measures that they discussed on that page to try to decrease scar tissue, several different supplements like serapeptase and WAB enzyme N, doing castor oil packs on my uterus with my abdominal massage, of course, exercise and balanced diets and whatnot. And then the other incredible resource for that page was that these women would discuss doctors that they had that they were having a lot of success with treating their Ashermans. So there was just this collection of doctors all over the United States, actually all over the world, really. There's several people in the UK and even Asia, all over the place. And so ultimately I would go back to that and use a resource to get my last hysteroscopy, but it was invaluable. I still check that group regularly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mentioned that in the resources for later in the podcast for sure.
Yeah, I always feel like those super specific Facebook groups are the best part of Facebook.
I mean, just didn't even occur to me that they existed.
Yeah, there's something for everything.
Absolutely, absolutely. All of those surgeries and all of that postpartum stuff that was going on, that was all during my husband's 4th year of residency. And when he finished his residency in 2022, we actually moved across the country to Orange County in Southern California for a year because he was matched to a fellowship there. And we loved that year in California. We went into it with the idea that it would be a vacation, as we knew we would be going back to PA afterwards, since my husband had accepted a job in the Philly suburbs. And even though we were not around our friends, it really wasn't something that was new for us. We had been in Central PA for 6 years. So we made some new friends and had a fabulous care team for our daughter. And it was the best. Our weekends were spent at the beach and the pool, exploring new restaurants. And fellowship was just a much more pleasurable time for my husband than residency was. I wouldn't say a lot less demanding, but it was less demanding than residency for sure. Less stressful anyway.
Yeah.
So it was just a really healing time. And it was at that time that we stopped using any birth control measures and decided that we wanted to have another baby. And we didn't have any luck until late May 2023 when I got a positive test. And we were just getting ready for our move back to Pennsylvania at that point. And we were going to go live with my family in Seattle for a month while our belongings made their way back to Pennsylvania. And very unfortunately, in July, while we were living with my family, I ended up having a miscarriage at 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. After trying for a year with no luck, it felt like that was our chance that was being robbed from us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And being in between providers for this whole thing was also a nightmare. But luckily, Seattle has a lot of amazing doctors. And the doctors who saw me were fearful to give me a medication or misoprostol in case I hemorrhaged at home due to my history with the arteriovenous malformation. Or if there were more sticky products of conception, like I had prior with my birth, then I would have to come in anyway. So the OB ended up recommending that I come in for a DNC, which I ended up doing. And I made sure to tell everyone involved that I could about my history with scar tissue and how vital it was for me to try to avoid more scar tissue. I really stressed to my doctor that I would rather have a hysteroscopy if possible, so they could just be seeing everything with a scope, and for her to use micro scissors and suction to remove the remnants of conception, which was another tip that I picked up from my Asherman's Facebook group, because heated instruments and some of the other instruments they typically use during DNCs can cause scar tissue a lot easier. So I was lucky, and my doctor ended up agreeing with my requests. And despite my request being granted, I was still super nervous and fearful that I would have scar tissue come back and put me at risk for further infertility or loss of additional pregnancies, leading to more procedures that could cause additional scar tissue. So we really put our fertility journey on pause at that point, because I decided that I wanted to be cleared by an Asherman specialist REI who could look at my uterus and tell me exactly how things were looking before moving forward with trying to get pregnant again, I really didn't want to try if there was scar tissue or other things that were going to impede us from having a more straightforward journey. And so, again, referring back to my special Asherman's Facebook group, there's a pretty solid consensus that the leading doctor for Asherman's in the United States is Dr. Keith Isaacson. And at that time, December 2023, he was at Mass General Brigham Newton Wellesley Hospital, which isn't extremely far. It was a plane ride for me, but it's still on the East Coast. So I felt like it was manageable, luckily. And if anyone's interested in looking him up for similar reasons, I'll just say he's now relocated to a private practice in New Orleans. So he's no longer in Boston. But I didn't want to waste my time with anyone else but the best. And I realized I was in a very, very fortunate position to have the means and support to do this. I had to wait until December of 2023, so several months for my appointment, which I knew would include my first awake hysteroscopy. My mom would come with me, and I was, again, very privileged to know exactly what was going to happen because of my Asherman Superhero Women support group telling me on Facebook exactly step by step everything that was going to happen. So from where to stay, recommendations for pain relief for the procedure, what to expect from the doctor, and afterwards, everything is well documented by several women.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so for the brief time I spent with him, it was honestly a true comfort to know that I was not interesting to him. I was just another woman coming in who wasn't a rare case or anything like that. I was just one of many women who came through his door in the same or worse condition. So for the procedure, I took an oxycodone before my procedure. And honestly, it was still, for me, a 7 out of 10 discomfort. It was not fun. Wouldn't recommend. But for me, I felt like it was the price that I paid to see him. And to have that peace of mind, I would do it again just for that. The procedure, luckily, it was only about 10 to 15 minutes, which is very, very short. He took several pictures, removed a small amount of scar tissue that he found at the orifice of one of my tubes, and then he was done. And he said he would have never known that I had severe stage 4 Asherman syndrome before. And he estimated I maybe had 5% scar tissue at the visit that day. And I was just absolutely astounded, relieved. And he gave me the okay to move forward with trying to conceive again, which was exactly what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so I had hoped that my body could make another baby. Yeah, I was really excited. So we continued to try on our own. I tried progesterone supplementation since I was having long cycles of 31 to 32 days. But I ended up trying a couple different fertility clinics at that point too, to better understand what really was going on. Why wasn't I getting pregnant? I went down a lot of rabbit holes of thinking I could possibly have silent endometriosis, especially since my grandmother had it and ended up having a hysterectomy. But I wasn't ready to do laparoscopic surgery, which is the only way to confirm endo. And the bottom line seemed to be from the fertility clinic that my endometrium was just not getting thick enough to support a pregnancy. Several doctors were saying because of how many times I had been instrumented with the hysteroscopies, the basal cell layer that produces the endometrium can become permanently damaged and just won't make that fluffy endometrium layer that an embryo likes to settle into. So yeah, for us, it was a very conscious decision not to first try IVF. I really wanted to try to give my body a chance. So my first step was trying medicated cycles with timed intercourse. And we did this 3 times total. The first 2 cycles, I was on letrozole. The first cycle, I didn't have hardly any increase in my lining. The second, I did, but it didn't result in a pregnancy. And the third cycle, I ended up switching fertility clinics because of a host of reasons, but I was just not happy with the way that I was being treated with between the doctors and the nurses. So that also held us up for a couple months while we switched fertility clinics and ended up at RMA, who I will say were amazing if you're in the Philly area. They were so great to work with. I had jumped through all the hoops that come with switching to fertility clinics. In our case, this one required a full panel genetic screen for both me and my husband before they would treat me, give me any medications. And so that took more time, at least another cycle to coordinate, which is really frustrating. Every month that you're actively trying to conceive, especially as you approach 35, feel so important. But eventually I was able to get started and they put me on tamoxifen, and it ended up being the cycle I kept this pregnancy. So that was really exciting.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. Such a long journey though. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I will say, as far as this whole secondary infertility that I experienced, it was truly some of the darkest days of my life. I felt so isolated, and even having a lot of friends, it doesn't feel like it matters when you don't have people that have gone through the exact same thing, or at least a lot of my friends also aren't even mothers yet. They're just not at that place right now. So it was something that was really hard. And I had a lot of days where I didn't have time to give it a lot of thought since I had Maya running circles around me. Yeah. But I also had a lot of moments where I was deeply devastated and really wondered if it was just a hopeless venture, if this was just something that was never going to happen. Yeah. So for women who are out there trying and living in that uncertainty, I know that pain so well. And my heart really goes out to anyone trying to conceive.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I think sometimes with the secondary infertility, it's just a completely different set of feelings. And, it's not the same community that you're looking for because, there's people that haven't had any babies and they're in a totally different mindset. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I could see it being really isolating. And then with your medical history, also just kind of scary of all the unknowns.
Absolutely. And that's with this pregnancy. I mean, when you're involved with a fertility clinic like I was, it's, you're pregnant pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
Like when you're going through any infertility, most women have no chill with waiting to take the test. I was taking that test like 8 days past ovulation. Like, I need to know. I don't want to waste my emotions of wondering. I just want to know. And right now I'm currently 29 weeks pregnant with my rainbow baby boy. And he'll definitely have his own story. I've already bounced around between 4 different OBs at this point.
Oh my gosh.
I've finally landed at a very specialized, I didn't even know these existed, but it's an Accreta center. Penn Medicine has an Accreta center in Philly, as does Jefferson, if anyone needs those resources. But this time I just have a laundry list of risks, things to look out for that I'm at higher risk of. Again, the preeclampsia, placenta accreta / morbidly adherent placenta. And just for anyone's, knowledge, I didn't know anything about accreta or morbidly adherent placenta before being thrown into this mix. And something to know about it is that there is a super large limitation in the ability to diagnose these things with ultrasound and MRI. Accreta has to be pretty profound for them to see it. And so in my case, we've reviewed that if I end up having accreta again, there's a very real possibility that I'll need a hysterectomy. So that'll be another journey that hopefully I don't have to go through, but I feel empowered just knowing what could possibly happen. And after feeling so in the dark from starting all the way back at my induction with, my previous experience. Yeah. And something that I'll just end on would be that something that I took away from the Birth Hour podcast about a month or 2 ago when I was listening. I can't remember which episode it was exactly, but one woman had made it her goal during her second birth to just find joy in the process of that second birth. And she too wanted a redemptive second birth and was so much out of my control for this one. I love this goal so much. I actually shared it with my husband, and we are fully committed to try to spend this next birthing experience in a joyful place as much as possible, even with all the possible twists and turns that it can come with. So,
yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So it's going to be my last time doing this. I feel pretty much 1,000% positive that that's true. So I just want to make it count. But I am actually excited for this birth and with everything that's to come.
Yeah. Well, you'll have to come back and share when you're ready for sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm excited.
All right. Well, I know you have quite the list of resources and you want to mention here. And then, of course, we'll put them on the show notes as well.
Yeah. So the Asherman's Awareness and Support Group on Facebook has been amazing. There's also a post Asherman's Babies group on Facebook that is equally amazing. I think there's two different groups, more so just for women that are like going to be more sensitive, of course, that are going through infertility with the Asherman's. Not to have to hear all these birth stories can be very triggering. Mm-hmm. So there's two different groups for those. Okay. And then, Ina May, Guide to Childbirth, as if it needs to be said one more time. Your podcast, completely invaluable. I can't thank you enough for all the work that you do, Bryn. It really has made a huge difference in my life, and I know so many other women.
Thank you. Okay, and then where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I love Instagram, but I am more of a consumer than someone who posts anything. Okay. So, but I do check it very regularly. I'm at Jenny Sherpa, which is my full name. And if you add me on there, I'm private, but if you send me a message, I would love to connect with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Bryn. It was great to talk to you.
Now I'm going to talk to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and all of the great products from Needed. Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to chat with me about Needed again.
Bryn, I'm so excited to be back.
Awesome. Well, before we get into all of the new things happening over at Needed, can you just share with my listeners a little bit about who you are and your role at Needed?
Absolutely. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Needed.
All right. So I recommend Needed to my listeners, my followers on Instagram all the time. I've been using the products for over a year now. And I just really love that with your perinatal products, you really go beyond the bare minimum. And it's just really important, especially for the people in my audience, because we know that during the stages of life where you're growing babies and feeding babies are especially nutritionally demanding. So I love that you guys are addressing these nutrient deficiencies and talking about now that not all prenatal vitamins are created equally. And on that note, your team just released the results of an IRB study highlighting these differences between standard prenatal vitamins versus needed. Can you just talk a little bit more about this?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited. This has been a baby of mine for a while.
Yeah.
But basically, there is overwhelming evidence that proper nutrient levels can improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life for both mother and baby thereafter. Mm-hmm. Yet, as we all know, despite our little kind of communities, nutrition has not been front and center in the perinatal standard of care. And most prenatals on the market provide bare minimum nutrition support. We're designing and conducting studies to add to the clinical literature to unequivocally prove that women deserve more support, resources, and radically better nutritional care. We really just fundamentally think the evidence just cannot be ignored anymore, as the lack of nutritional support is really failing women and children. So our goal for this study specifically was to take a more comprehensive look at nutritional status in pregnancy. The study compared nutritional characteristics between women taking the needed prenatal multi and a standard prenatal vitamin.
Okay.
We collected survey data and analyzed nutrient biomarkers, so nutrient levels actually in the blood themselves, in a diverse group of 235 adult pregnant women across 7 U.S. states. And what's really exciting and what you're hinting towards is that the results actually revealed quite striking insights into how maternal nutrition status differs by the type of prenatal vitamin a woman is taking during pregnancy. Specifically, we found that women taking the needed prenatal multi had higher blood levels of key nutrients for pregnancy, including vitamin D, B6, selenium, and zinc, among a number of others. When we compared prenatal subgroups, we found that only the group of women taking the needed multi had sufficient blood levels of vitamin D and vitamin B6 compared to the group taking the standard prenatal. And nutrients like vitamin D and B6 play key roles in pregnancy in supporting both maternal and baby health outcomes. So it's really exciting. And it's also important to reiterate that our study was diverse and the prenatal groups were comparable on several key factors outside of their prenatal vitamins. This is really important for the rigor of the study. So for example, 1/3 of the women in each group identified as a race ethnicity other than white, and women in both groups were in similar stages of their pregnancy.
Okay, and what does the IRB part mean?
The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they're basically a committee that reviews clinical research involving human subjects to ensure that certain ethical standards are met.
Okay, it's super important when studying pregnant women.
Super important when studying pregnant women, and in terms of showing proper kind of rigor and study design went into the methodology of how we conducted the research as well.
Right. So one thing that I thought was interesting is that a lot of this past studies weren't even done on pregnant women or even women. Oftentimes it was like based on white men as far as vitamin levels and things like that. So as you mentioned, these are really striking results. And what does this really mean for women in the trying to conceive or pregnancy or postpartum season of life? Like what should we be taking away from this data?
You're right that sort of there is a lot of missing gaps in the research, though we also have found that there is a lot of really good research emphasizing the need for better nutrition at this stage of life. But overall, we see this study as adding to the growing body of evidence showing that one, meeting nutritional needs through diet alone is very challenging in modern context. Mm-hmm. So supplementation is needed. Two, that most pregnant women in the U.S. fail to meet dietary recommendations for certain key nutrients that are very important for pregnancy, like vitamin D. And third, I think increased evidence that standard prenatals are really falling short in closing the gap between nutritional needs and dietary intake. And overall, we hope this study leads to more clinicians and moms advocating for the nutrition that is needed for a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah, and I've been sharing about this with my followers on Instagram from some of the data you guys are talking about. And one thing I thought was really interesting was the statistic about how few care providers are discussing nutrition with pregnant and postpartum women at all.
Yeah, that is absolutely striking. We found that nearly 80% of women reported receiving little to no nutritional advice from their OBGYN during their pregnancy care.
Yeah, and this is something that comes up on the podcast a lot because I feel like people really notice a difference when they have midwifery care versus OBGYNs because nutrition is something that's talked about in these much longer prenatal appointments and things like that. So yeah, it's a big part of feeling good throughout pregnancy. And I know that one thing that Needed really focuses on as well is that it's not just during pregnancy, but also postpartum. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
We equate it in a lot of ways to nutritional depletion, and that a lot of the importance for this life stage is in avoiding depletion. So meaning when your body lacks the essential vitamins, minerals, or other nutrients that are really needed for optimal function. And depletion is not something that occurs only through pregnancy, but women are more vulnerable in critical life stages such as pregnancy and breastfeeding. So that postpartum stage that you mentioned right there. And a lot of the problem is that women go into pregnancy already depleted and then increase their depletion in growing baby, so end up in a pretty tough spot postpartum. Mm-hmm. There are many contributors to this depletion, from nutrient deficient soil and stress. And then the signs of depletion like brittle nails, fatigue, headaches, mood changes, thinning hair, constipation, dry skin, all sound pretty familiar to us, right? Mm-hmm. And really research suggests that up to 95% of women experience nutritional depletion even when they are on a prenatal vitamin.
Oh my gosh.
Depletion is, I think, a much bigger problem than we actually, have historically given it credit. And a lot of us, women just assume we have to feel these things, these signs of depletion, just as part of our, that's just the status quo. That's how it's supposed to be. And I think a lot of our sort of emphasis is showing that no, radically better is possible. There are ways to better support ourselves through nutrition to minimize those signs of depletion.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to someone recording their birth story, and they were saying how, they were super focused on their nutrition during pregnancy, and then it kind of fell to the wayside postpartum. And it's like especially if you're breastfeeding, it's taking a lot of energy and nutrients, and then you're also sleep deprived because you have a new baby. So the depletion, I think, like you mentioned, is just something we really need to focus on beyond pregnancy.
Yeah, and most care providers aren't really reminding folks. They think of it as like a prenatal, not a perinatal.
Right.
There are some postnatals that exist, but I think the use of them in that breastfeeding life stage that is actually more nutritionally intensive than pregnancy is a non-supported part of this life stage. And, where we see so many women really talking about that postpartum period being the most difficult. And I think being able to advocate and raise awareness to better support and how do we care for mom, not just care for baby during that stage is very important.
Yes, I'm just nodding along to everything over here. So are there any other supplements that women should consider outside of a prenatal to help fight depletion?
Absolutely. So most prenatals and aren't included are vitamin and mineral blends. And there are many other nutrients that are supportive of combating nutrition. Unfortunately, we just don't think that there's a single product that can fully get you over the hill on depletion lack. So it needed what we are really focused on rather than just a single product, that we do hero our prenatal multi a lot, but really an emphasis on a system of products is most supportive. And for example, we do offer an omega-3 DHA EPA add-on. So DHA omega is often something that you probably do hear as part of taking that alongside your prenatal. And DHA and EPA are very supportive of a healthy pregnancy. Sometimes they are combined with a prenatal multi, but we often see that can lead to kind of lack of nutrient integrity or too low of doses. So we do think it is important to offer it as a separate product for that reason, but do advocate for that being added on to your system of products. And then there's a whole host of other products depending on needs. I personally really love our sleep support. As lack of sleep is a big contributor to depletion. And I also really love our breastfeeding safe cognitive support product. It's a product that really helps me sort of feel like me and try to do it all by being a working mom while still, breastfeeding and chasing after my kids. Being able to focus when I need to focus is a critical part of that.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of that one as well. So you guys offer several bundles and things like that with these add-ons. Where's the best place for people to start if they're trying to decide what's right for them?
Our website does help to guide you by sort of life stage or need, which is thisisneeded.com, or we're at Needed on Instagram. And we actually have a team of trained nutritionists and doulas as part of our customer support team. So they're eager and ready to help if you do want to sort of DM us or email us if you kind of get stuck on the website your own. So that's a great place to start. And then I'd also really recommend folks to go to thisisneeded.com/thrive to learn more about the prenatal study and the rigor that went into it, and a lot more results beyond what we're able to share today.
Yes, it's so fascinating. And I'm the same way. I can't squeeze it all in to share on Instagram either. And so I'm like, please go check it out, because it really is amazing what you guys were able to find out from this study. And I love that people are available in the DMs to help guide, because I feel like it can be really overwhelming when choosing your prenatal. And starting with the main prenatal is obviously a great choice, but I know lots of people want to take advantage of these bundles too. So that's great to know that it's available to DM or email.
Yeah, I think we're here to help. And it's really a passion of a lot of members of the team to do so. So we're excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for chatting with me about all of this. It's always great to hear what you guys are up to, and I'm always happy to share with my listeners about Needed.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much again to Jenny for sharing her story with us, and of course to Needed for sponsoring this episode. Be sure to head over to thisisneeded.com and use that coupon code BIRTHHOUR for up to 40% off your first order, and always recommend taking advantage of their bundles there so that you can use that coupon on that first order. And if you want more information from today's episode, including Jenny's resources with those linked Facebook groups for Ashermans and everything, just head over to thebirthhour.com and search for her name in the search bar, and her show notes will pop up for you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.